Anyway, it's 6
All
o'clock.
good.
Let's kick off. So welcome everybody to tonight. I'm very thankful for the folks at Kalina for allowing us to have this library of wine for tasting tonight. And I thank them for their cooperation with this. Bit of background to Joseph Phelps. The first vines went in 1973, which was around about the time, I think, Judgment of Paris, that very famous tasting that Stephen Spurrier did, was in 72. I'm pretty sure it was 72. And that really was a momentous time for Napa, because that's when the world sat up and started taking serious notice of what was going on in California. The first release of Phelps was in 1974, and it was almost entirely Cabernet. It was quite fortuitous for Joe Phelps that was such a brilliant year for Cabernet, because it just set them on the map immediately. He made his money in construction in Colorado, and apparently before he bought the vineyard, or the land, there was no vines on it at the time. He was actually flying grapes from Napa Valley to Colorado to make a wine while he was still living, I think, in Denver. Didn't take him long to realize that this was much more fun than building houses. So he sold out, I think, in the 80s and focused entirely on wine. I've got a little PowerPoint that, if I don't break the internet trying to share it with you guys, I'm just going to flick into that now. Yeah. So if you have a look at the screen, I hope everyone can see it. Right. Oh, yeah. Okay. So that's what the original homestead in St. Helena looked like in 1973. A little bit of water to the side, but the first comment that he made when he actually visited the site for the first time was, "This is pretty good land for cattle, but certainly no vines anywhere to be seen." In a period of about 15 years, if you look at that second map, the St. Helena home ranch is right up at the top there. And then he bought 8 different plots of vineyard. I think the Canaris vineyard down here was the last one that they acquired. It's quite interesting to note that the plots of vines are resting on either side of this crucible of mountains. And it's also, I went through quite a lot of imagery of all these vineyards, and they all seem to demonstrate, certainly the older ones seem to demonstrate this one particularity, that the vines are at fairly steep inclines as the mountains go upwards. And I guess from that, you're getting a fantastic protection from the elements. You're getting, if you're at the base of a mountain, you're enjoying the very coolest attributes of the geography that you possibly could have. And the way California is heating up these days, that's probably not a bad thing. Just before we head to the first wine, Joe then handed over the winery to Bill Phelps in 1998. And now Joe's not working around anymore, and there's 4 of his children are running the operation. And he even has 2 grandchildren in the game. So it's one of these interesting dynamics where a family vineyard has managed to stay all about family all the way through. So just in case nobody saw the group chat, I gave you the numbers of the wines. We're going to look at the Phelps Cabernet 16 first, and then we'll get into the Insignias after that. So 2016 Estate Cabernet. It's 93 points from Wine Advocates. I think what's immediately noticeable on the nose is, even setting aside for a moment that this was a current release, the 17s are coming out later this month, there's immense intensity and youthfulness about the wine that just jumps at you immediately on the nose. There's a fair amount of tea action in the nose, and also I'm getting a lot of glycerine, or an oily component in the nose, which is just gorgeous. And you'll see how that plays through when we taste the Insignia later. It actually shows that same aspect. It's 90% Cabernet, which kind of mirrors the 2016 Cabernet as well in terms of the actual mix. fantastic texture, just seamless. It almost shimmers. It's incredibly well integrated. I sort of was discovering this to a certain degree, tasting a completely different wine on Thursday nights with Bibby Greats, where the superstar class of wine is something that you can taste and enjoy all the way through. You're not looking for something specific. There's nothing that stands out. It all sits in harmony. And I think that you're certainly seeing an example of that. Very often with Californian Cabernet, I tend to raise the orange card when it comes to extraction and alcohol and fruit. But even in a wine, this is the entry-level wine, we'll look at Insignia in a little bit. I think this is showing all the attributes of a superstar winemaker and superstar fruit. It might be interesting before we go to the Insignia part of it. One of the most important things about Joseph Phelps was in 1974 with his Phelps Proprietary Red, he's been recognized by Robert Parker as being instrumental in the creation of a vintage release. In other words, not just this is our best wine and this is the mix. The Insignia, in theory, could have been any wine and any kind of blend of wine. In fact, his daughter Elizabeth speaks about he fully intended when he created the Insignia for it even potentially to be a Chardonnay. When they first did plantings, they planted everything. Riesling, Gewürztraminer, they kind of threw the kitchen sink at it. But very clearly, within 10 years, it was very obvious that it's all about Cabernet and or Merlot. In 1975, it was almost all Merlot. But these days, I think if you go back in the last 20 years, it's almost dominantly Cabernet. This 16 Phelps, of course, is mirroring that. You're seeing a little bit of Merlot. I'm picking up quite an interesting expression of the Franc and the Verdot. The Verdot is definitely giving it structure and form and throwing some of that peppery component that Petit Verdot does so classically well. When Wine Advocate talks about that blueberry compo, in other words, not just fresh berry, but that sort of stewed berry, you can definitely see those different elements of the fruit, especially in the mid palate, where you've got the dynamics of bright fresh fruit, but you've also got that secondary component coming through really, really well. There's a little bit of greenness for me on the back palate and on the phenolic when I'm going back second and third time to the nose, but it's by no means a negative. The big one is the tannic structure. It just shimmers, just flows so incredibly well. In terms of cellaring, the various wine people will talk about this not being ready for another 2 years and then running for another 8. That's the general consensus, and I think I tend to agree, because going back and tasting it again and again, that youthful green grip in the mid palate is something that will evolve and develop over time. Okay, let's kick on to the Insignias. And I think I might, if it's okay with everybody, I'm just going to keep the screen up, because what I've done is just a configuration of the 3 different years and the blend. It's quite important to see how he evolves every year in terms of what's grown best. Now, it might be an idea to line up the 14, 15, 16 all together and compare them side by side. The thing that binds these Insignias together in terms of climate is they were all recognized as mild winters. So there wasn't any frost consideration. There was nothing dangerous in terms of that element in the initial winter period. Then they all get very, very different. 14, it started raining and rained a lot at the end of February and all the way through March. And then summer kicked in. They had early bud burst in 14. In 15, it was actually, from a winemaking point of view, a a little bit more scary because you had very stable weather patterns all the way through until May, which is quite late, and then it started to get cooler. But in September and October, there were heat spikes. And that's always something of a danger for a winemaker because things can really run astray very quickly. They managed it, but what resulted out of that was very low yields, but super intensive, tiny berries and super intensive fruit. And you'll probably see that if you just compare the 14 and 15 on the nose, you'll notice just how vivacious and almost nerdy the 15 is compared to the 14. For me, on the nose of the 15, there's almost a little bit of smokiness, which definitely doesn't show on the 14 on the nose. The 14 is wrong word, is just more resolved, more relaxed, more poised right now. And that's not just a function, I think, of vintage. I think it's just, that's the way it's constructed. I would probably make an argument that 14 versus 15, the 14 is probably more of a classic style. That the 15 has a sense of urgency about it. It certainly didn't stop it getting a 98-point rating from Wine Advocate, but they, as styles go, they are quite different in style. Oh, the texture on 15 is unbelievable. Gosh, it's so good, really good. I think components of wet earth, there's a nice, bright minerality, sort of quartz-like component to the 15 and the mid palate. Probably some graphite, and I'm getting tea again, but you know, maybe Earl Grey, something like that. It has a very specific. No, it's not Earl Grey. It's something else. It'll come to me in a little bit, but the palate is amazing. Yeah, I think 14's quieter, more structured. It's showing its presence more in the mid palate, whereas 15's just a tray that goes all the way through. Just delicious. Interesting to note, you'll see on the screen, oh, geez, what have I done? Crashed the internet. Right, sorted. So 87% Cabernet in 14, 90% in 15, and 90 in 16. He's messed around quite significantly with the Thibodeau, 15 to 16. And it's interesting what a little component of that varietal does. So, you know, it has this incredible character and charisma, and a very small percentage of Verdot can make a very big difference to a blend. Some people in Australia have been courageous enough to try to make whole Petit Verdot releases, and they've, to my mind, I've never tasted one that's been any kind of a success. So looking at the weather in 16, again, mild winter. Remember, that's something that we kind of feel is something that binds these three vintages together. But very, very early bud break in March. Probably, they say, the earliest on record. But what was good about 16, and maybe from a weather point of view, is the thing that elevates it to this higher status from a ratings point of view, is an immensely long, steady, cool ripening period. And it might be the thing, and they often say that what the winemaker wants, as long as possible, is this even, balmy warmth, and no rain and no heat spike. So just playing it by the book, the 16 is definitely going to be a vintage that's better for the winemaker than 15 ever was. It's interesting to see, aside from the 99 pointer rating from Parker, it's been included in California's top 10 most collectible wines for 2019 by Wine Enthusiast, and is rated in the top 100 by Wine Spectator for 2019. I think that sense of oiliness that maybe, let me just get rid of this share screen now. I've seen enough of this. That oiliness is something that maybe plays through from the estate. If you've got any of that left, it might be interesting to show those two, to look at those two in one place, to see if you can pick up some more elements of the vintage. So looking at wine number 1 next to wine number 4. I've got to say, wine number 4 is a long way from wine number 1. A very long way. Quite difficult to actually look at them in the same context. I think that what's really beguiling for me about 2016 Insignia is a creaminess as well. And maybe that's where I'm getting that, I was banging on earlier about that sort of oily, definitely got that kind of component to it. There's a coolness, like a mintiness about it, and not as in green or raw, but more of like just a sense of coolness, or maybe camphor, something like that. And violets, masses and masses of violets. The big one again is texture. It's just really showing amazingly well. Anthony Galoni in the 16 speaks a lot about brambles and stones, hot stones. I'm not seeing that component, the stone component, but I'm definitely seeing a wild berry aspect to the 16 that certainly the 14 doesn't show. I'd probably classify 15 as more about red fruit for me today. But 16 is definitely dark fruit. And it just glides. It really is spectacular. So I guess just in terms of summary of the three, there's not a lot difference about against the 3 Insignia. It's interesting to see how 14 is the classic style. Everything's where it should be. It's neat and in place. I think what makes 2015 quite exciting is that they've made a masterful wine out of a really difficult set of circumstances in terms of the heat spikes. Yeah, a little bit later now, going back to 15, there's some of that savory bacon kind of thing on the nose. I opened these wines today for you guys at about 10 a.m. And then sealed them again in argon. So we're always seeing wines in this kind of format. We're seeing wines a little bit differently from when you just open a bottle, because they, to a certain degree, are being double decanted at an early stage and then in the jars. So it's certainly helping for these kinds of wines. But it's quite interesting looking at them in big glasses to see how well they've developed relatively quickly. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to jump in. Are there any favorites? Yeah, 15 definitely shows a different kind of nervy matrix on the palate. There's a urgency about the wine. There's something that's very different from the others, and you can translate it as intensity. Certainly it's intense, but I can see why 16 is just that big step up from 15.
Yeah, Rob. I mean, that to me, hi, it's Lou. The 16 to me is outstanding.
Yeah.
Step up. But I think the word you're looking for was menthol.
Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly it. I was thinking elastoplast, but I thought they wouldn't sound too good.
But it's that camphor mentholy thing that you're getting those top quality, cool climate cabs. I wonder if the Cab Franc has added a little bit more to the creaminess. It's got a creamier texture to it.
Yeah.
Maybe a touch more of American oak than French, maybe. I don't know.
I didn't actually research the oak too much. I was looking at all the cooperages, and it's quite interesting at this level of Californian wine. They make a huge deal about where they're buying the various barrels every year to actually integrate with the wines of that year. So if you look at the tasting notes, it's quite an art form. I never considered that the actual cooperage of the barrels themselves would be a component in a finished wine quite to this degree. It's quite fascinating. What I don't know, Lou, is how much of it is new and how much of it is second and third generation oak.
They seem to go for about 50% new, 50%
okay.
aged, roughly.
Right.
Every year, and mess around a little bit. But if you just smell the two, like for instance, the 15 versus 16, I can't smell the 14 anymore because I've necked it. It's gone.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. The 15 is much more muted versus the 16. The 16's pouring out of the glass at you and assaulting you. But
it just grabs you, right?
Touch more vanilla. It's flashier. It's whether that's good in the long run or not, I don't know. Maybe the 15 will end up being better, but gee,
I don't think so. I actually think that they've done a really great job out of a tough year. A relatively tough year.
Right.
I'm not sure. I'm just so sure that the DNA of the 16 is so damn good that I can see how it's going to outlive the others by a fair way. I think when I was doing the research, there were 3 or 4 wine critics on the 15 were saying drink now and giving it 5 to 10 years, whereas the consensus on the 16 is wait 3 and then it's got a long way to run. So it's probably indicating that the zealots are saying the 15 is an earlier drinking wine, no matter how you look at it compared to 16. That 16 is the gun, and I can see why it's the gun. It'll be really interesting to see how 17 goes, because if you play the numbers on vintage by vintage, 17 Napa's going to be super, super good. But at 99 points, you don't have a long way to run.
No, that's been released next week, I think, the 17.
Yeah.
Gee, hard to beat the 16, I would have thought. But
yeah, it's dynamite. I mean, those legs, I don't get a lot of overt alcohol, and so many of these sort of super premium Californian cabs show that, but I'm not getting anything.
What is the alcohol?
I don't know. Let me just have a look. I've got the website open here. Let's have a look. Tasting library.
I mean, there's no heat. It's not hot. Like you get some of those Australian over-extracted ones that are actually quite hot, right? There's no
yeah.
I think the alcohol's quite high, but it's not assaulting you.
Well, that's the trick. I mean, so often it's something that I've taken me a long time to get so it's 100% new French oak. From 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 different French cooperages.
For the 16.
For the 16.
Well, that's the difference. Okay.
Yeah, and it's not giving me an alcohol number in the notes here. But even if it is a lot of alcohol, the wine is so harmonious. It's so incredibly balanced and finished. It doesn't really matter, Getting lots of votes for the 2015 is the favorite.
Okay. Well, it's more subdued. It's more approachable.
Marcus, I think that the astringency of the 16, it's always, I guess, a trick looking at these verticals. Like you've got to try and peer down another 12 months and see where it's going to evolve. And I think when Galoni said, drink this 15 now for 6 years, I think he's spot on. That, it's already showing its cruising altitude, and it probably makes it a more consumable wine right now.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And such balance, really seamless. Very, very clever.
I'm going to ask you a bit of a novice question. So, say the 15, right? As you say, is drinkable now, and it's crack that open, decanter it, right? And you obviously leave it say an hour. How long would be for something like that? You would want it to be drunk within 3 hours, 5 hours,
I'd say so, mate. I think that it's not, there's some wines like the Pegaus and stuff that people will open the day before and get a little crazy about it. I think our climate is kind of demanding. You know, it's very hard to leave it out there for too long. I think that we're looking at it in a particularly different way because, as I said earlier, it's double decanting. With whole bottles, I'd open it if dinner's at 8. I'd open it at 6 and drink it at 9. And that's probably the right way to roll.
So it's still drinking good after 6, like after 5 hours in there, or 6 hours. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, it's prodigious. It's a big wine. It's incredibly well made. The tannins are all there. But if you can imagine that with food, it will just sing. I mean, any kind of meat protein with that would be absolutely amazing. And we're doing it hardcore with no food tonight. So I think I learned that from the Italians. You should never drink anything unless there's a plate of food in front of you at the same time. Yeah, there's definitely in 15, there's a youthfulness, there's a attention grabbing component to it. It's definitely not the classic Insignia. I think in previous times I've had the 10 and I've had the 12, and it shows a lot more like 14 showing tonight in terms of classic style and structure. The 15 is definitely the wild child out of the 3 in terms of how it shows today. So guys, if anyone's interested in hocking a kidney and buying some Insignia, I sent you a link in the email. I'm going to do a note to the general database tomorrow to show what we've got. The only restriction really is the 16 in terms of supply. There's very, very little of it. There's plenty of 14 and 15. And then when 17 does land on the island later in September, we might figure out a little bit of a taste of that and see how it looks. I'd love to put it next to 16 and see what how it's really showing. I have to say that the estate Cabernet next to these is battling to show its own. But we kind of thought that it would be cool to see what the estate level brand looks like. I can now sort of understand more clearly why Robert Parker talks about the Insignia as being one of the finest Cabernet blend labels in the world. And I think it's well deserved. Well, my glass is empty, which is very depressing. Yeah, I know, it's one of those endemic problems. I'm going to blame El Nino. So if there's no more questions from anybody, I'm going to say thank you for coming. It was great to taste these with you. I'm going to make a copy of this video and shoot it out either tonight or tomorrow. And enjoy the rest of your weekend. Next week, we're doing Brunello's Reservas 2013s. We're doing a set of those side by side. And then Jeff Grossett's joining us next Saturday for Grossett Polish Hill 19 and 20 side by side, and Watervale 19 and 20, which should be kind of cool to look at those. So I'll send a reminder out about that tomorrow. Remember to save your jars. It's $1.50 credited to your account for every jar. We just ask you to hand it over to our internal delivery guys when they're delivering your retail wines. The couriers for the tastings can't take them. So that's it from me. Thank you so much. Enjoy your Saturday night, and I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Great taste.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks, man.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye.